was largely manual because the mod is so small. Uh, the what was I gonna say? It was just basically doing all the MCP to yarn renames by hand, essentially. Um, so that was kind of like how that worked. Let's see, what's next? Yeah, so back to Botania. So next we'll talk about how we originally started porting to Fabric. Basically, after porting Patchouli, I'm like, okay, this is not too bad. It's kind of a nice platform to use. So around 1.16, this is like in the middle of 2020, um, I started thinking about porting Botania. Someone on the Discord is basically asked, when is Botania coming to Fabric? And I basically said, stay tuned, TM. Um, so what something that we did was in preparation for this wasn't we didn't just fork a new branch and then start going right away, right? So one thing that we did was you can start preparing for multi-platform porting by working in your existing code base. So we did lots of work in Forge before even starting a Fabric branch. And this includes things like getting rid of Forge APIs that we didn't need or want to use. So object holder, some of you might know from Forge, or the Forge registry APIs, reading from those, or the @event bus subscriber annotations, things like that the Forge people tell you are good practice to use, but they're not actually required. We got rid of all those and just moved back to the plain vanilla APIs. And one thing that was good here actually was Forge added mixin support, which is really crucial. So we moved a bunch of our reflection to mixins, to accessor mixins, and some little bytecode patches that we had to do to mixins as well. And then at this time, this was still MCP and yarn, so two different kinds of name sets. So we added some utility methods to smooth over like the number of times that these platform-specific names have to be specified. Like for example, we had new resource location Botania X everywhere in the code. So then we just added this method called prefix that just adds the Botania domain as a resource location. So that way we don't have to say the name resource location in 500 places in the code. We just access this one helper method. All right, so the takeaway here is that you want to do platform specific, or you want to do preparatory work on your current platform, because while you're doing that, you can still run your mod and test it and make sure it doesn't crash, right? So all the time while this was going on, we made sure that things still worked. All right, so after all of this was done, we actually started the work. So in July of 2020, we started the Fabric branch of Botania. And what we used was a tool called YarnForge by Ramid. I think he's here actually. What it does is it's a Forge Gradle plugin. You just dump it into your Forge workspace, you run the task, and then it spits out yarn code in another directory. And then from there, it's basically replacing all the accesses to Forge APIs one by one, slowly to Fabric. And this actually progressed for a couple months, and this actually got stable enough that we were able to run it on Vazkey's patron server in 1.16, though we never actually released Botania for Fabric 1.16. So another thing to note about this process was it's good to work systematically. This doesn't apply just to porting across platforms, right? It applies to porting to new versions of Minecraft as well. Something I see a lot of beginning modders do when they try to update their mods to newer versions, they just update their Gradle file, and then they open random files and just start fixing whatever compile errors they see. And that is very slow, and it also is very soul draining, right? Because it seems like there's so much to do whenever Mojang breaks some API and you get 3,000 errors, right? So one thing is you should try to eliminate entire classes of problems, right? So the thing I mentioned earlier, where in Yarn, the resource location is called identifier, you make one commit that does that replacement everywhere, right? Or if Mojang moves some method somewhere else, you make a commit that replaces that everywhere in your code. And by that, you automatically eliminate entire classes of problems, thousands of compile errors at once. And then what's left is the actual stuff you have to fix, which is usages of platform-specific APIs. All right, so this continued on for several months, actually, on the side. So as we started doing this, we noticed that several things started cropping up that were painful in this process. Let's see. Yeah, so while we were doing this in late 2020, it's not like the Forge branch was frozen, right? We still had bug fixing, some minor feature work, and also like porting to newer versions of 1.16, because as we know, like 1.16.2 messed everything up, right? So there was development in parallel between Forge and Fabric, and this exposed some issues in our workflow. Yeah, so basically how we handled this was Forge and Fabric were separate branches in the Git repository, and we had we basically had two different ways of propagating fixes back and forth between them. So on Patchouli, we would cherry pick the commits back and forth. And on Botania, we would do merges. Don't ask me why it's different. I don't remember either, but they were. And both of these schemes are non-satisfactory. If you cherry pick commits one at a time from Forge to Fabric, you can miss things. You have to list all of them using weird Git magic. For merges, you get merge commits all over your commit log, which is annoying. And once you fall behind, it's very hard to catch up. So one thing that happened was our Fabric branch actually got behind the Forge branch because of some refactoring in 1.16.2, a bunch of other stuff, and it got behind by about 1 to 2 months. And every time I went back and tried to merge it back into Fabric to pick up all the changes, it would just conflicts everywhere, right? Between MCP and Yarn or various other things would cause tons of merge conflicts. And this was actually the most soul-crushing part of the support. So at one moment, at one time, I had to merge the Forge branch in chunks of several commits at a time, just so I could keep track of all the conflicts that were going on. So you see you might have to zoom in on this one, but in the commit log, you see merged Forge 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up till 16. So I had to do 16 commits, merges in a row to get Fabric caught up to Forge. So that was really, really tough. But after that, things were pretty good. Right, so now we get on to the 1.17 era. So when this happened, they changed the license for MogeMap. You guys might remember. And at the time, Forge basically said, okay, we're fine with this license now, so we're going to switch to MogeMap. So we considered the fact that like we're forced to use MogeMap on Forge anyways, so we might as well switch Fabric to MogeMap as well, just so our merge conflicts aren't as ugly and terrible. At least the names of things will match. Right. So another thing was Forge 1.17 actually broke mixins for quite a while. So the release was delayed for that. And because of that, at this point, Fabric actually took over um, as the upstream for Botania. And yeah, new features and bug fixes would go into Fabric while we were waiting for Forge. And Forge ended up we ended up never actually making Forge Botania 1.17, just because like no one was really interested in it because Mojang cut half the content out of it. Uh, though I was not looking forward to more back and forth merge hell, like merging all the changes from Fabric back into Forge whenever we updated that, right? So I guess the next thing is the biggest thing that helped, right, is the multi-loader system. And basically it's a Gradle setup that Darkhacks and Jared told us about. And it's essentially where you have a module that only depends on vanilla code against, it's compiled against vanilla with raw mojmap. Here's a diagram that's quite helpful. So here's vanilla at the top, and in the middle, we have what I call the XPlat or cross-platform module, and it only depends on vanilla code. And then you would have two Gradle modules that depend on the XPlat code, and then it can also depend on your specific platform, so Forge or Fabric. So in a lot of the terminology online, you'll see common. Some other people use that, but I think that's kind of confusing, so I use the word crossplat or xplat. So basically, we started doing this experiment in 2022, so very early this year. And as before, right, there was some preparation work that we could do purely in Fabric before we ever start doing this whole craziness, which is doing things like removing at environment or at side only, right? Because you can't name those things, those annotations, you can't use them in cross-platform code. There are other things. You can check the commit logs if you're interested. So one important thing that you need when you do this is sometimes the XPlat code needs to call back into the platform. For the one example of this is in Botania, we have an add-on called Garden of Glass, which is like the skyblock mode, right? So we have to change some behaviors when that mod is loaded. So how do we, from this code, this XPlat module, we can only talk to vanilla. So how do we say, is this mod loaded right now? So we came up with this system where you can down call from XPlat code back into the platform. So basically we have this interface called iXPlat abstractions. It's kind of a bad name, but that's what it is. And this interface has a method called isModLoaded. And then we have two implementations of the interface, once for each platform, which forwards the call to the appropriate place. So for Fabric, it's Fabric Loader isModLoaded, and for Forge, it's modlist isModLoaded. And everything that is cross-platform is handled this way. So if I need to fire an event, I go through here. If I need to get a capability or API, I go through this. Lots of things go through here. But I guess like it's scoped in that every method in this interface is something we specifically need for the mod to work. And it's actually not, there's quite a few methods, but it's actually not too big. It's not thousands of lines of loader specific abstractions. Right, so now that we had this like setup in mind, it's time to start migrating, right? So what we did was we took our working Fabric code, this is our current Fabric code that works perfectly, and we dumped it all into the Fabric module in this picture, or in this previous picture. We dumped it all into here. And then we made an empty shell for Forge and cross-platform. And then what we did was we slowly sliced parts out of the Fabric module and moved them into the cross-platform module. And as I mentioned before, what's good about these incremental changes, right, is you can do it bit by bit, and you can test every single step to make sure you're still compiling, your mod still works, it doesn't crash. So we kind of did that for several months, for a few weeks probably. Months is probably an overestimation, until as much as possible we had everything moved out into the cross-platform module, where it only depends on vanilla or this IX-plat abstractions thing. So this was like several weeks of work. And what's funny is the end state is kind of the same, right? We started with a fabric only mod, and we spent 2 months working, and now we have a fabric only mod in the end, right? But this is not useless in that we have a strong abstraction boundary now, where we have a list in that IX-plat abstractions interface. We have a list one by one of every single thing we have to implement to get this mod working on Forge again, right? So the Forge work is actually very clear from now on. It's go through that interface, go through every single method, and implement it on Forge. And that was actually very smooth, because everything was all in one place. So we implement all those methods, and then we did hooked up all the initialization. So like all the bootstrapping startup stuff that is platform specific. You have to do that again, of course. And then we got Forge working. So let me see. Yeah, so basically what happened was we basically ported to Fabric and then back to Forge. But the second like back to Forge part was way faster, because we had a short list of everything that we needed from the platform itself. And I guess one thing that is important that ran through this common thread is Mojmap, because it allows us to use one set of names for everything. And I hear that you can hack things to use Yarn, though I haven't tried, and it's probably super hacky. So we'll probably stick with Mojmap for this in the future. All right. So now that leads us to where we are today, and it's actually very, very nice. So before, if you wanted to change gameplay, you would make a change in one branch and then merge it into the other branch, right? Now you just make one change in the cross-platform module, and there's no merging back and forth. We just have one 1.18.x branch, so no more -fabric, -forge branch names. And I guess one thing I wanted to talk about is things that I think made this process easier for Botania, because not all mods might be able to follow this kind of process that we did. So for Botania, what made it special is, first of all, Botania is pretty feature complete. So there's low churn in the code. Every so often we add new features, like these arbitrary tailor models you see. There's small features every now and then, but overall the whole mod is feature complete. And second of all, in our code, we emphasize staying close to vanilla. So using vanilla's abstractions when possible, like we use iInventory or whatever the new name is now. Yeah, so we try to keep our code close to vanilla so it can be shared as much as possible. And third, we use Mojmap. I just mentioned this, but it provides a common way of naming things across all the platforms. Next is, I also mentioned this kind of before, is Mixin allows us to keep a lot of our vanilla ASM hooks in the cross-platform module, where we don't have to implement it twice, once in Forge JavaScript ASM, and then again in Mixin. So that's a big thanks to the Forge people for being willing to add Mixin. And then finally, one thing. Just wait for whoever is passing by to pass by. Okay.
There's a talk in here. If you want to listen, you're welcome to.
So the last thing So lastly,
We
I
gathered.
think the most important thing actually on this list is there's the quote unquote political will from the maintainers to make this happen.
Yeah, if you don't feel like porting it, nothing's gonna happen either way.
Yeah. So one thing that's this whole multi-loader thing, what it relies on is you have to be in the same repository as the first party dev team, right? If you're like Create, where it's a separate org, separate repo, separate team, you can't really do this, right? You have to do merges from upstream, right? So you have to be willing to have the first party team take you on and allow this to happen essentially in the same repository. Right, so I'm gonna open the question thing now. I have like one more slide, but if people want to start asking their questions.
No.
So this is just a fun kind of thing. So some interesting stats on the code size of Botania. So this is the cross-platform module. There's 67.8 thousand lines of Java, lots of JSON, though most of that is generated. And you can see that the loader or platform-specific Java line count is actually pretty low comparatively. That's so 88% of all Botania code is reliant only on vanilla. And then the remaining 12% is pretty evenly split between Forge and Fabric. And most of that is just like initialization, registering event handlers, and also integrations. So JEI and Curios are Forge only, so their integration code obviously belongs in the Forge module, and then same for EMI or trinkets, etc. Right, so...
Wait, I thought Curios was Fabric and Trinkets was Forge.
Oh, oops.
Nope, trinkets.
I'm not sure though. I could be wrong.
Curios.
It's reverse.
Curios is on Forge. They did have a Fabric version, but Trinket's kind of like is kind of like the successor to it on Fabric. Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh yeah, Bobbles was the Forge one.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Bobbles preceded Curios, so Bobbles is what we used before 1.13, and then Asinor kind of like disappeared. So yeah. All right, so just some closing thanks to the Botania team. So that's Hugh, Brielle, Winfrey, and myself for helping maintain this mod. Thanks to Blame Jared and Darkhacks for teaching us about the multi-loader system, and also to all of the VIPs and patrons who helped test the Fabric ports. So thank you all. And then one last thing is that we are commissioning a retexture of Botania because the current textures are 112 textures and they kind of look ugly now. So we're Artemis and Valkyrie are retexturing the entire mod in the modern style. So feel free to check out our booth or go to botaniamod.net/retexture.
Stop purring!
And to learn more about
the
textures. Yeah. So now is the question time. I have a couple like preemptive questions that I'm just going to answer out of the gate just to, because I foresee these questions. So first is, will X other VASCI mod get a Fabric port? The short answer is probably not. If you're a developer and you're interested, you can talk to us. The short answer, the other side of the answer is that each of the large mods for VASCI mods or Violet Moon is maintained by separate teams. So I don't touch Quark or Psy at all. I just do Botania and Petroli. So each one will have to make their own decision on this front. And I think VASCI is mostly focused on Forge. So Quark Fabric is not likely, at least not in this multi-loader form. You can do manual merges, but so far we have this branch sitting around and no one has touched it. So evidently the demand is not too high. And then the second question that I foresee is, why aren't you using Architecture? Right? So if you don't know, Architecture is kind of a system that allows you to do this kind of multi-loader, multi-platform kind of thing. And I guess my thinking behind this was, this is something that I've learned over the years of porting or maintaining mods for Minecraft, is that core dependencies are risky. So we mentioned this just now, but there used to be a time when Botania just was blocked because Baubles did not update, right? So we had to wait for Baubles or do it ourselves, and then we could port Botania. And I didn't want to stake the lives of the mod on a third-party compatibility later. And because that thing can go away or stop being maintained at any time, right? And the surface for potential bugs with architecture
What the hell?
is a lot higher, right? Because architecture has to implement a lot of APIs that everyone wants. With our whole IX abstractions thing, we implement just what we want, right? No more, no less. And it's lighter weight. There's less Gradle hackery because architecture uses some weird Loom thing, I think. But yeah, so we gladly accept dependencies for integrations, right? Like JAI or EMI, but Botania itself does not require any other mod for core functionality other than Patchouli, which we also control, which also has 0 dependencies. So that's kind of the rationale there, is that I don't want to have to like tear out half the mod when architecture inevitably dies or goes unmaintained, right? All right, so that was the 2 foreseen questions that I had. So let's go to the question list. So the first question was an architecture question. So I'm just gonna skip that. Oops. Okay. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
1 second, I wrote it down.
Easiest thing is to put it on a book and throw it in. Just
Yeah,
to
yeah, I
make
put
sure
it in.
gets
I
there.
put it in the. You wanted me to put it in the hopper so you can read it yourself?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
do that.
All right.
We've got about 25 minutes left. We want to be finished about 5 minutes before the hour, just so you guys know.
Yeah, cool. So the next question is, for the purposes of learning, would you recommend porting from one loader to the other and back before using multi-loader? I would. That just sounds like extra work, honestly. I don't know what you mean by learning. This multi-loader thing is really necessary for, or it's only usable for mods that relies mostly on vanilla, right? If a lot of your code has to be platform specific, I don't see a point in multi-loader. But if you want to be multi-loader from the start, then you could definitely start with it and go from there. You don't have to start on one end and go to the other and then come back. That sounds like extra work for you. And one thing on this note to mention is that Darkhacks actually has a multi-loader GitHub template that has this all set up, so you can just clone it and start writing a new cross-platform mod. All right. So next one's another architecture question. Another architecture question. What are some unique challenges you have had to deal with when it comes to registering?
Press the green.
Oh, sorry.
Stop messing with jukeboxes.
Nobody's messing with jukeboxes.
By registering, I'm assuming y'all mean like registries. So yeah, I can talk about it. So Forge has their own Forge registry system, and then Fabric and Quilt kind of use the vanilla API. What we do is we just kind of okay, so for Forge, there's these registry events where you have to like do your registrations when the specific event fires, right? So what we do is we have this block of code in the XPlat module, the cross-platform module. What it does is it takes a by consumer of ID and the thing you want to register, and it just calls that consumer with everything, all the blocks you want to and items that you want to register. And so in the Forge code, we have a event handler for registry event.block. So then we just call modblocks.submit all block registrations. And then we pass it a lambda that calls the Forge API. And the same thing happens for Fabric and for all the other registries, essentially. Okay. What's the most frustrating inconsistency between Forge and Fabric as an XPlat abstraction? Let me think off the top of my head, but I can pull up the iXplat abstractions class very quickly and skim through it. There isn't much, I think. I guess capabilities. So yeah, I guess inventories are kind of in that class of issues. So like Forge has capabilities and Fabric has nothing really. Like we use cardinal components on the Fabric side for internal stuff. It's kind of annoying because you have to kind of do everything twice, but it's not too bad, I think. What else? Scroll. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think like there's like a random grab bag of methods in this interface, but things aren't very egregious, I feel like. Nothing's really super hacky. Yeah. Okay. This is it pronounced, what's the pronunciation of the mod? And the answer is whatever you want. I say Botania with the O sound, but if you want to pronounce it like botany, like Botania, I don't know. That's more awkward. So I think most people say Botania, but whatever you want.
It's Botania.
Okay, next thing is, what is a funny thing you've run into when making a multiloader? Can't really think of anything off the top of my head. It's just the usual bugs that happen. I mean, I had a separate bug tracker for when porting to Fabric for the first time. If you're really interested, you can just read that to see what we ran into the first time around. But I can't really recall anything particularly funny. Okay, next is what 1.7.3 beta port 1. The answer is never. All right, next question is, from your point of view, how cool are the members of the Botania team? Very cool. Everyone in Violet Moon is pretty cool. So you should come hang out in our Discord. All right, next thing. How do you deal with the differences between platforms for cross-platform down calls? And there was a bit more about like how different it is. I think this kind of is the same as the previous question. Things aren't very egregious. There's some things that are annoying, like the capabilities, but I guess I'm reading the interface down. There's a couple methods that Forge patches from a static method into an instance method. So I have to do a platform-specific call when it could have been a cross-platform call. But honestly, that's not really a big hackiness kind of thing. It's just a minor annoyance. So yeah, it's pretty simple as long as your mod is mostly reliant on vanilla only. Okay, so Fizz says, what was one of the good things to come out of the multiloader port for the mod and one of the worst things? So I think the best thing, right, is it's available on Fabric and Quilt for everyone to enjoy. And yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, right? There's more players can enjoy the mod. And in terms of like bad things, I can't really think of any, right? So if we had gone not using multiloader and like 2 branches for every version merging back and forth, that would be my answer, right? I don't know how long I would have lasted doing that before burning out. But with multiloader, where we have one code base for all or basically all logic, it's pretty easy. So it's been a really good time. I've really enjoyed the fact that we can play Botania on Fabric in Quilt now. Next is from Anonymous is is Botania a tech or magic mod? To that I say grab a lexicon, open it, and read the first page. Okay, so next is not a question, but I'm low-key interested in doing a beta 173 port. No guarantees. And to that I say good luck. That's all. All right, any other live questions? Because that's all for the books. Luck. One more? That's all.
It might take a second to go through.
I don't know how this system works, but I don't see any. Oh, here we go. If it weren't for multiloader, would Botania currently be on Fabric or Forge? So before we went to multiloader, there was a Fabric port. It was just separate branches, right? So it would have existed, though the maintenance overhead of that would have been really high. So I don't know how long I would have lasted, like maintaining that in that state, right? So I think like burnout is a real thing, and modders get burnt out all the time. So I wouldn't say it was for sure, but like if I had to keep doing the old merge things everywhere all the time workflow, that would, like, me burning out on one of the two would probably be a lot more likely. And if I had to, at that time, if I had to drop one, it would probably have been Fabric, just because Forge is Botania's original player base, and the player base is larger there, just in the interest of that, right? But now we have multi-loader, so everything is happy and good, right? All right, cool. All right, anything else? Oh, one more.
There's like
Guess
3
I
or
have to
4
wait a
on
while
the
for it to
conveyor belts.
load.
They're just slow because of the TPS.
Maybe the question got lost.
No, I can see 2 books coming in. All right. The only item transport we have is create conveyor belts. So.
Oh, the take rate is low. Okay.
Yeah. One of them's just coming.
Is Vazkey a modder by Neat?
Luck.
Sure. Okay. Are there undiscovered Easter eggs in the mod? I saw some funny file names when looking through the jar. Not that I know of. I mean, Botania has the wing password, but that's been known for a while and hasn't been changed. Though I might change it later. Yeah. So that's like the only hidden thing Botania has. There's also these tiny potatoes. We have a system where you can use resource packs to add custom potatoes with specific, if you name them specifically, you can have different models for them. I guess these count as Easter eggs, but it's not really a hidden thing. You can just go see all of them. But yeah. Can you foresee, okay, next one is, can you foresee any possible reason to stop using multiloader? Not really. The only dependency this has over the old way was something called Vanilla Gradle, which is what the cross-platform module uses to decompile Minecraft. But I think that's pretty well maintained because Sponge uses it. So unless that dies, but that's not likely, I think. Yeah. Oh yeah, so Jared says you can also replace Vanilla Gradle with Loom. So I think we're pretty well covered in terms of that dependency. And I guess one thing is I'll address that I thought of here is in this system, like how easy is it to temporarily go back to one loader only, right? Let's say Forge released 1.19 pretty fast this time, but let's say for some reason Forge is slow with some version again. Is it going to hold up everything? And the answer is no, because the way you specify the modules, I can just comment out one line basically, and it'll just disable and not compile the Forge side of things. And then I can do the cross-platform part and the Fabric part, and then re-enable the Forge part later. So it's not like I have to disentangle everything, or I have to wait for both platforms at the same time. Cool. Anything else?
That's it.
Yeah. How hard would it be to add another loader to multi-loader? Not very hard. So basically how the Gradle hacker works is it takes the cross-platform module and essentially like pastes it into the loader, the platform-specific module, and then compiles all of it as that platform. So as long as that platform, that mod loader, supports compiling emoji map code, which it probably should, then it's not going to be an issue to all the time new things. I guess one thing that I thought of when at this point was, let's say for example we want to support quilt explicitly, right? Well, quilt is very similar to Fabric, so there might be like some weirdness where we have to find a way of sharing code between Fabric and quilt specifically. So it's just like another level of indirection in that graph, in that diagram I showed with xplat in the middle. You just have another Fabric and quilt, and then Fabric and quilt.